One of the first jobs I had was as an after-hours janitor at Come and Go. Most of the time, my shifts lasted from around 9 p.m. to 6 a.m., when the manager arrived in the morning. Usually, I'd be scheduled to work with 1 or 2 other people, but it varied, and if anyone ended up calling in sick, I could easily find myself working alone. For the most part, I liked the quiet. I could get a few hours of studying or watching movies in when no one else was around. My friends asked me all the time how I didn't get creeped out working there so late by myself, and honestly, I'm not sure. The one area of the gas station that I did find creepy, though, was the warehouse, which was really just the unfinished basement below the store. It was a bit larger than the layout of the station. Sometimes I'd have to run down there for something, usually the soap we used to clean the floors. But that was pretty rare, as we kept a small stock upstairs to pull from. One night, I was there, alone, and I had used all the floor cleaner and had to go down to the warehouse. The place was barely lit up even with all the lights on. It was around 2 in the morning, so I had quite a bit more of the shift to go. Just as I stopped and reached for the soap, I heard the sound of footsteps somewhere else in the basement. I knew I was the only one there and nearly pissed myself. Instead, I grabbed the soap and then took a quick look around all of the warehouse shelves. But there was no one there. As I reached the top of the stairs, I practically jumped out of my skin. There was a man waiting there, probably mid-20s, just staring down into the basement. I said something along the lines of, "Jesus, can I help you?" And he said his name was Josh. It was his first night on the schedule, filling in for one of my coworkers who skipped her shift. Apparently, the manager had just told him to come find me and follow me around as I did the job, which was on brand for the boss. After shaking off the shock and surprise from the man's sudden appearance, I gave him a quick tour, showing him where we kept the soap downstairs and where the break room was. He mentioned the manager by name, and he had some of the basics under his belt already from talking with him earlier. But the longer we worked together, the weirder this man made me feel. He just kept staring at me, like barely blinking, watching my every move. And every once in a while, he'd make some creepy comment under his breath. Nothing too crazy, just off enough for me to notice. We didn't really have much to do, so he skipped taking a break and left his shift early, around 5 in the morning. That was my idea. I was happy to have the last hour to myself, especially with how weird the dude had been. My manager showed up shortly after 6 a.m., and after saying hello, I asked him why he didn't tell me in advance about Josh. The manager was confused. "Josh," I repeated, "the new guy." His response made the hairs on my neck stand straight up. "What new guy?" he asked. "We don't have any new guys." I tried to laugh, but couldn't. "He started last night," I said. "He shadowed me the whole shift." My manager shook his head and grimaced. "You were the only person scheduled last night," he said. "There shouldn't have been anyone else here with you." We called the police and pulled the shitty camera footage, but as far as I know, it never went anywhere. My manager reluctantly gave me a week off to get over it, but I never ended up going back. I'll never know what the guy's intentions were, where he came from, or why he was watching me so closely. Maybe I don't want to know.
When I was a child, I had a friend named Lucy. She was a neighborhood girl who would come over to my grandmother's house, which was where I lived at the time. There was a park by my house that had a deep creek next to it. I couldn't swim, so we always had to have an adult with us when we were near the creek. Lucy was a toxic friend, but I didn't know at the time. She would always threaten to stop being friends with me or stop talking to me if I didn't do what she wanted. She would always say that she deserved my toys and my family and friends more than I did. I didn't mind this, as I had a hard time making friends, and Lucy was one of my only friends. One night, Lucy came over and she said she was bored and wanted to go to the park. I told her my family was in the backyard and we had to have an adult with us to go, but she said she would leave and never come back if I didn't go to the park with her. I followed her and we went to the park. She walked right past the playground equipment to the creek, and I asked her what she was doing. She said she wanted to swim, and I told her I couldn't swim, and she called me a string of hurtful names, including weak, stupid, and an awful friend. This really hurt my 5-year-old self, so I started crying. This made her even angrier, and she told me something I'll never forget. "You're an awful child. Your family deserved me and not you." I was so confused and sad that I just ran home. I never saw her again, and I just thought she was so angry she really never spoke to me again. Now, about a year ago, my family was talking about my many imaginary friends, and my mom said my friend Lucy really creeped her out, because she was supposed to have a daughter before me who they wanted to name Lucy. My mother had a miscarriage, and Lucy was never born.
Spring break had finally arrived, and my friends and I were eager to escape the confines of our dorms and embark on an adventure. Sarah, Jack, Emily, Mike, and I had been planning our trip for months, and we settled on a remote cabin deep in the woods for our getaway. If only we had any idea what we were actually in for. As we drove deeper into the wilderness, excitement bubbled up within me. The towering trees and winding roads seemed to whisper tales of hidden mysteries and untold secrets. Sarah, our fearless leader, couldn't contain her enthusiasm, sharing stories of past adventures and promising an unforgettable spring break. After what felt like forever, we finally made it to the cabin, which was deep in the woods, buried in trees. The air was thick with anticipation as we unloaded our belongings and settled in, but as night fell, we all started to feel a bit uneasy. Jack was the first to voice his concerns. He's pretty much always smiling, so you know if he looks serious that something is wrong. He said he kept hearing strange noises outside the cabin, rustling leaves and snapping twigs and what sounded like footsteps walking around his window. Sarah, who is known to be optimistic, promised it must have just been some wildlife like a deer that was walking by. But as the night wore on, we only got more uncomfortable. Emily, trying to calm us down, suggested that we go for a walk and just go outside and investigate ourselves. There has to be a logical explanation for this, she said. So we all agreed, reluctantly, but as long as we all stayed together, what really could happen, right? We grabbed flashlights and ventured out into the darkness, and the forest felt like a living creature itself. Moments after we left the cabin, a piercing scream shattered the quiet of the night, and we all froze in our steps. It sounded like Sarah, but as we all turned around, she was nowhere to be found. We'd only taken a few steps out the cabin, but Sarah was gone. We went back inside, but the phone lines were dead. Yes, this was all taking place at a time long before everyone had an iPhone in their pocket. We tried to talk things through overnight and even went back out in search of Sarah, but we never found her or any clue of where she could have gone. Nobody slept a wink that night, and as soon as the sun began to rise, we knew we needed to head out to seek help. I think we were all trembling, I know my heart was racing as we made the long walk back to civilization. We ended up filing a missing persons report for Sarah, but her disappearance was never solved. There was not a single clue that told us where she could have been. Some people from school whispered that we must have done something to her, but we loved Sarah. We would do anything to have her back. Jack became more and more withdrawn, and Emily dove into her studies. School became the only thing she would talk or think about. Mike had descended into a spiral of paranoia, and he was convinced that whatever had taken Sarah was coming for the rest of us too. Eventually, one of us found an old newspaper article, dated several decades before, that told the story of a family that had disappeared without a trace while living in the same remote cabin that we had stayed. According to the article, the family had reported strange occurrences in the weeks leading up to their disappearance. Unexplained noises, voices in the night, and a horrible feeling of dread like they were being watched or hunted. Despite their best efforts to escape or find help, they seemed to be consumed by the same malevolent force that had come later for Sarah. I hope she's alive and that she's okay. And I pray that I will never encounter that horrible monster again.
This happened about 13 years ago, when I was a sophomore in college, attending a liberal arts school in New York. Within the first month or two of freshman year, I had found myself in a very tight-knit group of fellow theater geeks. 6 guys, myself included, and 1 girl. And they all loved horror movies and ghost stories. I had found my crew. Freshman year was tough, but we all held each other up and made the whole experience more enjoyable for one another. At the beginning of sophomore year, we decided that in October, as the Halloween season was ramping up, we would drive out to a creepy wooded spot in a nearby town for camping some night and scare the crap out of ourselves. We did some research and found that there was a particularly isolated area about 30 minutes away, infamous for paranormal sightings. Perfect. The 7 of us split into 2 different cars and headed out into the night. Allow me to set the scene. You turn off a busy main road, flooded with strip malls and restaurants and whatnot, and you are almost immediately greeted by complete darkness. Again, this area was very heavily wooded. It was essentially a large web of winding roads surrounded by trees. Very few streetlights and very few houses. Without a GPS or a good sense of direction, one could easily get lost in there. We all made sure to have fully charged phones and flashlights just in case, but the goal was to keep driving until we collectively decided to pull over and go exploring. So, following the directions, we made a left off the main road, driving for 30 minutes or so into this dark network, picking directions at random, just getting intentionally lost. Our cars made a turn, and to our surprise, there was a huge log in front of us. We had reached a dead end of some kind, with nothing but trees beyond it. We all got out to see what exactly it was, stepping over the log, and noticed 2 narrow trails leading in separate directions. This seemed like as good a time as any to grab our flashlights and do some amateur ghost hunting. We flipped a coin and set off on the trail to the right. The trail was so narrow that we had to walk single file to avoid getting whacked by branches. For whatever reason, I ended up in the back. I'm usually pretty rational and level-headed, but I have to say, the further we went in, the more I was overcome with an uneasy feeling. I kept hearing sounds deep in the woods, unable to shake the feeling we were being watched. But I seemed to be the only one who heard these things, so I shrugged it off as my imagination. And in any case, the whole point of us being there was to get scared. Not to mention the fact that we were 7 able-bodied college students. What would we come across that could take us down? We followed the trail for about 20 minutes, and just when I thought it would never end, we came to a massive clearing. And I mean massive. It was a large open field of unkempt grass, comparable in scope to a golf course but not nearly as well manicured. Trees surrounded the entire field, which was so large we could not see the end of it from where we were standing. I was thrilled to get out of that narrow trail, but I don't think any of us were expecting to find an area so vast. One of my friends pointed to the right, where there was an old, dilapidated house several hundred yards away. It was completely dark, with no cars or signs of anyone actually living there. We walked over and shined our flashlights at it, and sure enough, the windows and doors were all boarded up. I peered between the boards on one of the windows, and what I could see was an old white couch covered in plastic, but an otherwise empty room. Whoever used to live there was long gone. Because there was no way in, and because we all felt sufficiently creeped out by the house anyway, we decided to walk closer to the trail where we had come from, have a seat in the field, and figure out what to do next. We walked towards that narrow trail, but before we could sit, my friend Mark stopped what he was doing. His expression dropped, and he pointed. We all turned, and on a very far side of the field, directly across from where we had come, we could see someone tall, lanky, and pale dancing among the trees. And by dancing, I mean skipping around, grabbing a tree, swinging around it, and then doing the same to another tree, like a do-si-do. The moon was so bright and the woods so dark, it actually took a second for us to really understand what we were looking at. Jay, the 6'4" skeptic of the group, wasn't seeing it. I leaned into him, pointed in that direction, and said, "Jay, look where I'm pointing, don't you see that?" He squinted a bit, and the second he saw it, he gasped with everything he had, clutched my arm, and whispered, "What the hell is that?" What happened next sent shockwaves through all of us. Whoever it was, they stopped dancing, looked in our direction, and started charging straight at us. Without even thinking, we freaked and ran back to the trail. While the walk into the woods took about 20 minutes, we made it back to our cars, hopped in, and were peeling away in closer to 5. Once we were a safe distance away, we pulled over, got out, and checked in with each other about what had just happened. My heart was pounding, and I know everyone else was feeling the same way. Nearly 15 years later, we are all still friends, living in different states but keeping in touch through marriages, divorces, children, etc. But occasionally, out of the blue, one of us will send a group text to the others with something to the effect of, "The woods. That really happened, right?" And it most certainly did. That experience is always in the back of my mind, and I'm pretty sure it always will be. Here's the thing that still resonates with me about that night. Whoever that was, they were dancing maniacally in the woods at 1 a.m, and then ran directly for a group of young adults, not at all fazed by the fact that they were severely outnumbered. Did he know we were there from the second we parked? Was he the sound that I kept hearing when we walked the trail? Whatever the case may be, when he came for us that night, you can be sure none of us wanted to stick around and see what he was truly capable of.
It all started when I,
a broke college student looking for some extra cash, agreed to house sit over spring break. Seemed like an easy gig, just chill in a fancy mansion for a week, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. So this distant relative I barely knew existed hits me up out of the blue with an offer I couldn't refuse. They needed someone to watch over their empty mansion, the Blackwood Manor, deep in the woods. The email was vague, bordering on cryptic, but promised a fat paycheck in return. Naturally, my broke self jumped at the opportunity. As I rolled up to Blackwood Manor, I couldn't shake the sinking feeling in my gut. The place looked straight out of a horror movie. A creepy old mansion surrounded by nothing but trees for miles. The driveway stretched on forever, and the closer I got, the more the mansion seemed to loom over me, like it was watching my every move. I pushed open the creaky iron gates and stepped into the courtyard, feeling like I'd just walked into a haunted house at a theme park. The whole place was eerily quiet, with not even the wind daring to rustle the leaves. I hesitated a moment, wondering if it was too late to bail, but the promise of cold, hard cash kept me moving forward. Inside, Blackwood Manor was straight up spooky. It was like stepping back in time to the Victorian era, with dusty old furniture covered in moth-eaten sheets and creepy-ass portraits staring at me from every wall. I tried to shake off the heebie-jeebies crawling up my spine, reminding myself it was just an old house, but damn if it didn't feel like it was alive. The first few days were pretty uneventful. I wandered around the mansion, poking my nose into rooms that hadn't seen daylight in God knows how long. But as the days dragged on, things started getting weird. I'd hear footsteps echoing in empty hallways when I knew for a fact I was alone. Doors would creak open on their own, slamming shut behind me with a force that made my heart skip a beat. And then there were the whispers. Soft, barely audible voices that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. At first, I brushed it off as my overactive imagination playing tricks on me. But the longer I stayed in that damn mansion, the harder it became to ignore the feeling that something was seriously wrong. Then came the night that changed everything. I was dead asleep when a blood-curdling scream ripped through the silence, jolting me awake so fast I nearly fell out of bed. My heart was pounding like a jackhammer as I stumbled into the hallway, following the sound to its source, the locked door at the end of a deserted corridor. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for the key, unlocking the door with a click that sounded deafening in the silence. I swung the door open, revealing a staircase that led down into darkness. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn back, but something compelled me forward, deeper into the bowels of the mansion. As I descended into the cellar, the air grew colder, thicker, like I was wading through a pool of ice. Cobwebs brushed against my face, and the stench of decay filled my nostrils, making me gag. And then I saw them. 2 glowing orbs staring back at me from the shadows. I froze, my blood turning to ice as the orbs drew closer, revealing a twisted, nightmarish figure that seemed to defy all logic and reason. It was like something straight out of my nightmares, a creature from the depths of hell itself. I wanted to run, to scream for help, but my body was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. And then, with a sudden rush of movement, the creature lunged at me, its claws outstretched, ready to tear me apart. But just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished into thin air, leaving me alone in the darkness. I stumbled back up the stairs, my mind reeling with terror and confusion. What the hell had I just seen? Was I losing my mind, or was there something truly evil lurking in the walls of Blackwood Manor? In the days that followed, I was plagued by nightmares, visions of unspeakable horrors that left me trembling and drenched in sweat. I tried to convince myself it was all just a trick of the mind, a product of spending too much time alone in a creepy old mansion. But deep down, I knew the truth. Blackwood Manor was haunted, and I was its latest victim. I don't know what happened to the mansion after that, and honestly, I don't want to. Some things are better left buried in the past. Blackwood Manor is one of them. But even now, years later, the memory still haunts me, reminding me that some nightmares never really end. And as I sit here, recounting my tale for whoever will listen, I can't help but wonder if Blackwood Manor is still standing, still waiting for its next victim to stumble into its dark embrace.
I don't usually find myself in situations like this, but that night was different. I was driving through the middle of a national forest, and it was almost 2 a.m. I'm not sure what possessed me to take such a desolate route so late, but there I was, miles from civilization with my gas gauge dangerously close to empty. There had been a sign a few miles back that said no gas for 45 miles. It had been the kind of ominous warning you see in horror movies right before something bad happens, but my options were obviously limited. I could either push through on fumes and hope for the best, or stop at the gas station it was advertising. Normally, I'd never consider stopping so late, especially in the middle of nowhere, but the thought of being stranded out there was even worse. My nerves were already on edge as I rounded the bend, and I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of relief and apprehension when I saw the small gas station come into view. I was surprised it was even open at that hour. The station had one of those flickering neon signs that barely illuminated the words 24-hour self-serve. The place was practically swallowed by the surrounding forest, with trees pressing in on all sides, their shadows stretching across the cracked pavement. It sort of felt like stepping into another time. What really caught my attention, though, was the old man in dirty coveralls working on one of the pumps. He looked out of place, even for a run-down gas station in the middle of nowhere. His clothes were covered in oil and grime, and he was hunched over, focused on something near the base of the pump. I couldn't tell what he was doing, but he didn't seem to notice my car pulling up. I parked near one of the pumps and got out, the cold night air hitting me like a slap. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves in the breeze and the hum of the station's lights. I tried to pay at the pump, but my card wouldn't go through. The machine just beeped at me, refusing to authorize the transaction. I figured it was probably old equipment and that I'd have to try another pump. As I moved to the next one, I glanced over at the old man. He hadn't looked up once, just kept working on whatever he was doing. Something about the way he ignored me felt off. I'm not the kind of person who likes to bother other people, but I needed gas, and he seemed like the only person around who could help. I called out to him, asking if he knew what was wrong with the pump. He didn't respond. It was like I wasn't even there. He just kept his head down, twisting away at something with a wrench with his back to me. "Excuse me," I called again, louder this time. But still nothing. He just kept working, the metallic clink of his tools echoing in the stillness. A chill ran down my spine, but I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was hard of hearing, or maybe he was just one of those grumpy old guys who didn't like to be bothered.
Either way, I needed gas. The second pump wouldn't take my card either, so feeling frustrated, I decided to go inside the small store attached to the station. The lights inside were on, and through the smudged windows I could see a cluttered counter with a few scattered items. A couple of candy bars, some cigarettes, and a register that looked older than I was. It felt strange going in there, like I was intruding into a place that I didn't belong. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside, but there was no one at the counter. The place smelled like stale coffee and dust, and everything was coated with a thin layer of neglect. I noticed a small TV in the corner, its screen filled with static, and an ancient-looking radio playing some crackly old tune. The whole scene was surreal. Then I saw him, the old man behind the counter, slumped over and sound asleep. His head was resting on his arm, and he was snoring softly, completely oblivious to my presence. I felt bad about waking him, but I was getting desperate to get back on the road. I cleared my throat and knocked gently on the counter. He jolted awake with a start, letting out a small yelp of terror. His eyes were wide with confusion, and for a moment, he just stared at me like I was some kind of ghost. Then, remembering where he was, he chuckled nervously, rubbing his eyes. "Sorry about that," he muttered, his voice gravelly with sleep. "Must have dozed off. It's been a quiet night." I couldn't help but laugh a little too. It felt good to break the tension. "No worries," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "I just need some gas. The pumps outside won't take my card." He nodded, still shaking off remnants of sleep. "Yeah, those pumps are old. Sometimes they act up. Cash works better if you've got it." I took out a $20 bill from my purse and handed it to him. "Can you please put this on pump 2? He took the money and punched a few buttons into the register. As he did, I mentioned to the man outside, the one working on the pump. "I tried asking the guy outside for help, but he didn't seem to hear me," I said. "Is he fixing something?" The man behind the counter stopped what he was doing, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What guy?" "The old man in coveralls," I said, feeling a bit uneasy. "He was working on one of the pumps when I pulled up." The attendant looked at me like I'd said something crazy. "There's no one out there," he said slowly. "We don't have any maintenance scheduled, and the company sure as hell wouldn't send someone out at this time." His words sent a shiver down my spine. "But I saw him," I insisted. "He was right there. He wouldn't say anything, but he was definitely working on the pump." The attendant shook his head. "You must have been seeing things. It's late, and this place can play tricks on you if you're not careful." I didn't know what to say. The whole situation felt off, but I didn't want to push it. I just wanted to fill up my tank and get the hell out of there. "Yeah, maybe," I said, trying to sound casual, even though my heart was pounding. "Thanks for the gas." I headed back outside, the bell jingling behind me as I left. The night air was colder than before. I walked back to my car, shivering and glancing around the lot. The old man was nowhere to be found, just like the attendant had said. But there was something else. Where the man had been working, there was a mess of gas spilled along the pavement, the pungent smell of fuel filling the air. It looked like someone had yanked the nozzle out of the pump in a hurry, letting it gush onto the ground. A trail of fresh oil led from the puddle of gas straight into the dark woods beyond the station. A thick, black line that seemed to disappear into the trees. My heart raced as I stood there, staring at that trail. But there was one more thing. Just near the edge of the woods, lying in the grass, was an old, rusty wrench. The same kind of wrench the man had been using when I saw him. It was covered in a dark, sticky substance, but I could tell from where I stood that it wasn't oil. It was blood. I backed away slowly, my instincts screaming at me to get out of there. My hands shook as I grabbed the nozzle and started filling up my tank, my eyes darting back and forth between the woods and the station. I felt like something was watching me, waiting for me to let my guard down. Every second felt like an eternity. But finally, the pump clicked off, and I hastily shoved the nozzle back into place. I jumped into my car, locking the doors as fast as I could. My hands were shaking so badly that it took me 3 tries to get the keys into the ignition. Finally, the engine roared to life and I floored the gas pedal, not caring about speed limits or the curves of the road. I just wanted to get as far away from that place as possible. As I drove, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone or something following me. But there was nothing, just the empty road and the darkness pressing in from all sides. Eventually, the forest thinned out, and I reached the edge of the woods. The tension in my chest began to ease, but the fear lingered, gnawing at the back of my mind. I didn't stop driving until I reached the next town, where I pulled into a well-lit parking lot and finally allowed myself to breathe. I sat there for a long time, replaying everything that had happened. I couldn't explain what I'd seen, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't imagining it. That gas station, that man, whatever it all had been, it was real. I never took that route again, no matter how much time it might save. And to this day, I can't pass a gas station late at night without feeling a shiver of unease, wondering if I might see that old man in the coveralls again, working on a pump that's long since stopped working, in a place where no one should be.
I love road trips. There's nothing like the freedom of exploring the world by yourself. I was on an assignment for the Army, making my way up from San Antonio, Texas to Tacoma, Washington. It was a long drive, and they gave me 6 days to report to my new unit. The first day of my journey, I planned to get as much driving in as possible so I could spend a few days in Utah, a sort of mini vacation, you could say. This was January, and the days were short, so maximizing the amount of daylight I had was crucial. I got up extra early that morning, carried the last of my bags out to my Corolla, signed out of my old unit, and hit the road at roughly 5 a.m. It was an amazing day. I saw the landscape transform around me as I headed farther west than I had ever been in my life. From the San Antonio metropolitan area, to the savannas of the Edwards Plateau, to the pancake flat farmland of the Great Plains region, America's breadbasket. Finally, the farms opened up into prairie, and I saw the Welcome to New Mexico, the Land of Enchantment sign. Now, I was really in the middle of nowhere. Continuing on US Route 380, I eventually found myself in Roswell. I could have gotten a few more hours of driving in to make it to Albuquerque, but I figured since I was in no rush, I might as well see what Roswell had to offer. Who knows if I would get a chance to visit again? As a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious, I took a self-guided tour of the shops and attractions. The next day, I continued to Albuquerque, then westward on Interstate 40. By the time I reached Gallup and started northbound on US Route 491, I still had 2 hours of driving left before crossing into Colorado, and another 45 minutes before I would get to Cortez, where I planned to stop for the night. However, the daylight was already running out, as sunset was at 6 p.m. I got a coffee and refreshed myself for the final stretch. It was supposed to be easy, just a straight shot. But looking back now, I figured that had I decided to stop in Albuquerque instead of Roswell the previous night, I would have already been in Colorado by now, possibly making my way into Utah. I could have saved myself from what was waiting for me on that desolate highway. Route 491 stretched far into the Navajo Nation. On either side of me were endless expanses of prairie bookended by dark indigo mountains on the horizon. To my left, the sky glowed a faint orange-purple, the light slowly dying down like smoldering embers in a fire, until finally plunging the land into darkness. Every now and then, I would see the forlorn headlights of another car passing by, which gave me a bit of relief that I wasn't completely alone. I also had my road trip playlist on to keep me company, and call me ironic, but Hotel California was playing. After passing the small, lonely town of Newcomb, the next piece of civilization would be Shiprock. However, between the two was a 36-mile stretch of absolute nothingness, an abyss I would have to cross, and I was not ready for what I was about to witness. After several miles and having not seen another car on the road, I saw something strange emerge from the horizon. Barely lit by moonlight, I thought it was a road sign at first. Then, as I came closer, I realized it was a person, walking on the shoulder of the road in my direction. I squinted, trying my hardest to focus on the figure. In the darkness, I could tell they were wearing a poncho of some sort, with long black hair flowing down past their chest. Who could be walking out here all alone at night, I thought. Whoever it was, they had no lights, no reflectors, no strobes of any kind to signal to passing cars that they were there, and they walked on the pavement, dangerously close to oncoming traffic. I pulled to the left a bit to give them more room. Suddenly, my stereo cut out as if I had turned it off. The screen went completely dark and my phone disconnected from Bluetooth. While this was unusual, it certainly did happen from time to time, so I thought nothing of it. As I approached, I saw the person raise their right arm as if to flag me down and hitch a ride. Oh, no, I thought. There's no way that's happening, buddy. As my headlights swept by, I realized it was a man, dressed in a button-up shirt, a wool poncho, jeans, and cowboy boots. His large belt buckle glinted as the lights passed him. But in that split second, I realized with abject shock that not only were his eyes painfully wide open, but they seemed to be tracking me. Somehow, he was able to see me through the glare of my headlights and look me dead in the eyes, not breaking contact until I had passed. I was shaken for a bit, but my nerves gradually subsided. My stereo abruptly turned back on, and my music continued playing. I looked in the rearview mirror. He was gone. I couldn't see him. Maybe he's too far behind me already, I thought. No, that couldn't be. It must just be too dark. I drove on, trying to figure out what had just happened, but at the same time forcing myself not to think about it. I brushed everything off as simply my imagination. The darkness and the shadows playing tricks on my mind. Just when I thought I had moved on, I saw another shape in the distance. Another person walking alone at night? There's no way. They walked along the shoulder of the road, swaying back and forth. Slowly, I could make out that this person was also wearing a poncho. Then I saw what looked like long black hair reaching down past the chest. It was the same man, but how? He raised his arm again, trying to flag me down. I kept up my pace with no intention of stopping for any reason. And just like last time, my stereo turned off. Suddenly, the man leapt out onto the road, arms waving frantically. I swerved into the left lane, narrowly avoiding him. In my headlights, I noticed he had the same wide-eyed look, his gaze locked onto mine. I also saw that his clothes did not look as they did the first encounter. Once they were clean, if not well worn, but now they were soiled and tattered, rags barely hanging onto his withered frame. His hair was wild and unkempt, with clods of dried dirt stuck in the locks. but his eyes remained the same. My heart nearly burst through my chest at the sudden shock. Hyperventilating, I slowed down and glanced into the rearview mirror to make sure he was all right. But nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to see. The man was running. He was sprinting towards me. I centered the wheel and accelerated, hoping to get as much distance from him as possible. But as I continued to speed up, so did he. Faster and faster I drove, but every time I looked in the mirror, I would still see him right behind me, perfectly keeping pace, his body tinted red by my taillights. I could feel my temples throbbing and my hands getting slick with sweat on the steering wheel. I was sick to my stomach. There's no way, I thought. I looked forward, hoping to see a faint glimmer of light from the town ahead, but I was still too far away. I looked back in the rear view. The man was gone. I should have been relieved, but I knew better. I looked around, hoping to regain a visual on him, but I couldn't see anything. I took a deep breath and refocused on the road with my guard still up. Just keep driving, I told myself. Only a few more miles to go. Then, out of the corner of my right eye, I saw something. Another shape. It looked like some kind of animal, though I couldn't make out exactly what it was. Under the moonlight, I could see it running alongside my car, its forelimbs reaching out in long strides, its back undulating like a dog. Closer and closer it came. The closer it was, the more of it I could see, little by little. And I noticed its limbs were far too long for its body. It had no tail. The head was oddly round, and from it came a trail of long, black hair. I slammed my foot on the gas, pushing my car's engine harder than it had ever been pushed before. By now I was clocking well over 110 miles per hour, but this creature, it kept up. It wasn't phased. It simply ran faster and faster to match my speed. Just what was this thing? How could anyone or anything run this fast? Soon my car would hit the top speed. And then what? How long could it maintain that before breaking down? It wouldn't be long before the engine overheats. But regardless, I would eventually run out of gas. And when I do, what would happen if that thing got me? At 120 miles per hour, my car had reached its limit. This was the fastest I could go, but the creature continued its pursuit. My temperature gauge was approaching the red, and it wouldn't be long until the engine overheated. Suddenly, like the beacon of a lighthouse on a stormy sea, the first light of town came into view. It was close. If I could just go a little longer, I could make it to safety. I pressed on. I fixed my eyes on the lights growing brighter on the horizon. They bloomed outwards, glimmering in the night air. Though it was a small town, it was a sight for sore eyes. Looking in my periphery, I saw the undulation of the creature's spine as it kept pace with my car. But now, it was starting to slip away, steering farther and farther from the road. It suddenly hit me just how hard my heart was beating. Beads of sweat dripped down my face. And finally, the creature was gone. My stereo once again turned back on, and as my music resumed, I let off the accelerator, breathing a deep sigh of relief. That man, that creature, whatever it was finally gone for good. Having white-knuckled the steering wheel the whole time without realizing it, my hands were extremely sore, but I was glad to have made it through. A week later, I told another soldier in my unit about what I had experienced. Being originally from Albuquerque, she was familiar with the Native American legends of the Southwest. The conversation steered towards a certain creature that she would not dare speak the name of. She also told me that the highway I took was well known for all sorts of paranormal phenomena. Up until 2003, Route 491 had been called US Route 666. the Devil's Highway. My Aunt Kay was in her early 20s in the 1980s. This was before she married my uncle, when she would drive long distances back and forth between her parents and my uncles to visit. It was a transitional period for them. He had just graduated, and she hadn't moved out yet to be with him. It was a long drive across several states through the desert, which took her hours. This desolate highway would have stretches of road that lasted hundreds of miles, where you quite often wouldn't see another driver, let alone a gas station. So Aunt Kay set out and began one of those journeys. A couple hours into the drive, she noticed a dark vehicle slowly catching up to her. She barely noticed as she continued to sing along to the Les Mis soundtrack until the vehicle got aggressively close. She turned off the music and looked into her rearview mirror, seeing the vehicle flash its brights and a hand pointing at her car and motioning for her to pull over. Alarmed, she quickly slowed down and began to look for a good place to pull off the road and see what must be wrong with her car. The second she began to pull off the road, she heard as clear as day a voice say,
"Don't pull over."
Then again,
"Don't pull over."
Whether it was a guardian angel or just a gut feeling, a jolt of adrenaline and fear shot through her body as she hit the gas and peeled back out onto the highway. Heart pumping, Aunt Kay silently asked herself what the hell was that, as she saw the vehicle peel out behind her. The dark vehicle continued to closely follow, flashing their brights and motioning for her to pull over. Fear and confusion overwhelmed her as Aunt Kay began to question what was going on. Why was the driver motioning for her to pull over? Was there something wrong with her car? And what the hell was that warning she felt or heard? This was before cell phones, and it would have been a severe situation if her car broke down out there, but she had no choice but to press on. Just as her resolve wavered, the dark vehicle picked up speed. It entered the oncoming traffic lane and came level with my aunt's car. The driver smiled, pointed, motioned and mouthed the words, "Pull over," to my aunt. She said the second she looked into his eyes, she felt pure evil. She felt a horribly sick feeling in the pit of her stomach and again heard the words in her head,
"Don't pull over."
She described him as looking scary and greasy, with a smile that she'll never forget. It sent chills through her. This quickly dispelled any thoughts she had of pulling over, and she put the pedal to the metal to try to lose him. He chased after her. When she slowed down, he slowed down. If she sped up, he did too. It got to the point that he began to try to push her car off the road. Aunt Kay was at the point of tears as this creep continued to terrorize her out in the middle of nowhere. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she saw a couple of semi-trucks off in the distance. She felt that if she could get closer to them or even between those trucks, she would be safe, so she took off. He continued flashing his lights, honking his horn and trying to hit her car until she was close enough to the trucks. As she got in between them, she saw the dark vehicle slow way down, eventually disappearing from view. She stayed with those trucks for a couple hours until she felt safe enough to pull over at a gas station and cry. Many years later, my aunt and uncle are married. He's working at a law firm as a high-profile criminal prosecutor in Las Vegas. She's now a full-time mom of several young children. Since I've known my aunt, she's been obsessed with true crime. Dateline, 2020, Unsolved Mysteries, they're always playing at her house. This day was no different. She was folding laundry in the kitchen while listening to the TV in the other room. The interviewer was talking about a man who was being interviewed on death row. As she paired another match of socks, she heard the man describe one of his tactics for procuring victims. According to him, he would wait along the side of the highway. When a car would go by with a family, he'd wait. Another car with a male driver would go by and he'd wait, but every so often, a car would go by with a pretty young woman driving alone, so he'd pull out and follow them, flashing his brights, honking and motioning for him to pull over. Aunt Kay, paralyzed, continued to listen. When they would eventually pull over, he would tell them there was something wrong with the car, telling them to pop the hood so he could help them. When they did, he'd yank out a few wires, disabling the car. "No problem," he'd say. "My buddy has a shop in the next town. I'll give you a ride, and he'll give you a good deal." My aunt slowly moved to the living room, and when they'd get in his car, he'd have his way with them, and then dispose of them somewhere in the desert. When they asked how many times he did this, he responded, "Too many times to count. They'll never find all the bodies." Then they asked if anybody ever got away. The man paused and said, 2 or 3. My aunt stood alone, staring into the same toothless grin she saw on that highway that day. It was the face of Henry Lee Lucas, also known as the Confession Killer.
I remember it like it was yesterday, even though it's been years since those chilling nights. It started innocently enough, as many childhood tales often do, with an imaginary friend. But this wasn't your typical imaginary friend. This was something far more sinister, something that still sends shivers down my spine when I think about it. His name was Isaac, or at least that's what I called him. I was around 7 years old when he first appeared. My parents had just moved us into an old house on the outskirts of town, a place with creaky floorboards and drafty corridors. I didn't have any friends yet, so I suppose my young mind conjured up Isaac as a companion. At first, Isaac seemed harmless enough. He would appear in my room at night, a shadowy figure lurking in the corners, whispering secrets only I could hear. He told me stories of faraway lands and adventures beyond my wildest dreams. But as the nights went on, Isaac's tales grew darker, his whispers turning into chilling murmurs that seemed to seep into my very soul. I tried to tell my parents about Isaac, but they dismissed him as a figment of my imagination, just a phase I would soon outgrow. But Isaac wasn't just a product of childhood fantasy. He was something far more real and sinister than they could ever imagine. As the weeks passed, Isaac's presence became more oppressive, his whispers more insistent. He would tell me things, horrible things that no child should ever hear. He spoke of death and despair, and of things lurking in the shadows waiting to consume me whole. I began to dread the night, knowing that when darkness fell, Isaac would come. I would lie in bed paralyzed with fear as he whispered his dark secrets into the silence of my room. And then, one night, he asked me to do something unspeakable, something that would change everything. I won't repeat what he asked of me, for even now the memory fills me with dread. Suffice to say, it was something that no innocent child should ever be asked to do. But in that moment of fear and confusion, I found the strength to defy Isaac. It wasn't easy, and for a time I feared he would never leave me alone. But eventually, his whispers faded into the darkness, and I was left alone once more. My parents never knew the truth of what happened those nights. Months passed without any sign of Isaac. I convinced myself that it was all a childhood delusion, a product of an overactive imagination, trying to cope with the loneliness of a new home. Yet, as I grew older, a nagging feeling persisted, a sense of unease that I couldn't shake. It was during my 13th birthday that Isaac returned. I had almost forgotten about him, buried his memory deep within the recesses of my mind. But on that night, as I blew out the candles on my cake, I felt a chill run down my spine, the sensation of being watched. I brushed it off as paranoia, blaming it on the darkness and the flickering candlelight. But as I climbed into bed that night, I knew something was wrong. The air in my room felt heavy, oppressive, as if a storm was brewing just beyond the horizon. And then I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible above the sound of my own heartbeat. "Hello, old friend," it said, the voice sending shivers down my spine. I froze, unable to move, as the whispers grew louder, filling the room with their dark presence. Isaac was back, and he was more powerful than ever. His whispers were no longer just words. They were commands, urging me to do things I knew I shouldn't. I tried to resist, to push him away, but it was like trying to hold back the tide with my bare hands. Night after night, Isaac's presence grew stronger, his whispers more insistent. I couldn't escape him, couldn't find solace in sleep or sanctuary in the light of day. He was everywhere, a shadowy specter haunting my every waking moment. I became a shell of my former self, consumed by fear and paranoia. I stopped going to school, stopped leaving my room altogether. My parents grew concerned, but their words fell on deaf ears. They couldn't see Isaac. They couldn't hear his whispers echoing in the darkness. And then one night, I woke to find myself standing in the middle of my room with a knife clutched tightly in my hand. Isaac stood before me, his eyes burning with otherworldly fire. "Do it," he whispered, his voice cold and unyielding. "Do it, and we can be together forever." I wanted to resist, wanted to fight back against the darkness that threatened to consume me. But it was too late. With a trembling hand, I raised the knife and plunged it into my chest, the pain searing through me like a white, hot flame. As darkness closed in around me, I heard Isaac's laughter echoing in my ears. And as I slipped into unconsciousness, I knew that I would never truly be free from his grasp, that his whispers would haunt me for all eternity. I can still feel his presence lurking in the darkness, waiting and watching, biding his time until he can return once more. And I pray that he never can, for I fear that if he ever does, I may not have the strength to resist him again.
I was stationed in Nebraska in the late 80s. At the time, I hung out with my roommate and another friend. My name is Tracy. My roommate's name was also Tracy. And our third friend's name was Stacy. When we were together, everyone always thought we were lying, and being the silly teenagers we were, we always found it funny. One weekend, we decided to take a road trip to Kansas City, Missouri. We were speeding down the highway, laughing and singing at the top of our lungs. We were happy and having the time of our lives. Stacy was driving and she had a bit of a lead foot. She must have been going too fast because before long a state trooper pulled up behind us and turned on his lights. Stacy immediately pulled over. By the time the officer made it to her window, she already had her license and registration in hand and the window down. The officer looked at her and then looked at me and Tracy. He then said, "I want you to follow me. Don't try to run off or y'all will be going to jail." He then turned, walked back to his car, and got into it. Needless to say, the three of us were puzzled and spoke amongst ourselves to wonder why he didn't simply take Stacy's ID and write her a ticket. The officer pulled out slowly and we dropped in behind him and followed him down the road. He drove a little ways and turned onto a dirt road that was surrounded by tall stalks of corn. We all stopped speaking as we became more alarmed. However, we were young and scared, and since he was a police officer, we continued to follow him. The officer drove for some time down this dirt road and then pulled into an area that had a big beat-up old barn. As he parked and we stopped behind him, a group of men with shotguns exited the barn. It wasn't until that point did we realize we were in mortal danger and panic set in. The officer walked back to our car and told Stacy to get out and follow him to his car. As she got outside, she looked at me and Tracy with sheer terror on her face. She followed him to his car and he motioned for her to get into the passenger side. She did. Tracy and I were crying as the armed men stood outside of the car looking at us. We prayed that Stacy wasn't being hurt, and somehow that they would let us leave. After some time, Stacy bolted out of the officer's car and ran back to our car and jumped into the driver's seat. She was crying hysterically, so of course, Tracy and I began to cry harder. The officer approached our car, this time going to Tracy's window in the front passenger seat. He asked, "Is it true y'all are in the Air Force?" To which Tracy replied, "Yes, sir." The officer calmly said, "Get out of here and go back to where y'all came from. I better not see y'all again." Stacy turned on the car, whipped it around and sped back down the dirt road. She somehow navigated back to the highway. As we drove back toward the base, the silence was only broken by an occasional sob from one of us. Stacy drove for a while, and as soon as we crossed back over into Nebraska, she pulled over on the side of the highway and began to sob heavily. Tracy and I hugged her and asked if she was hurt in any way. She shook her head no. She wasn't hurt. After she calmed down enough, she told us what happened in the police car. After she got into the vehicle, she offered the police officer her ID and told him she was sorry for speeding. He took her information and then asked her, "What are you doing with those two?" Stacy was white. She explained that we were on a road trip. He then told her that if she would do certain favors for him, he might let us go with a warning. At that, Stacy had a complete meltdown. I guess while he was waiting for her to calm down, he finally looked at her ID and saw that she had given him a military ID. He asked her if we were all in the military, and between sobs, she said we were. He asked where we were stationed, and she told him, and he said to go back to her car. After Stacy told us what had occurred, I think it hit all three of us at the same time, that the only thing that saved us was that we were in the military and stationed at a nearby base. We hugged each other and cried until we could not cry anymore. We didn't report what had happened. Again, we were teenagers and didn't think we would be believed over a law enforcement officer, and we never talked about it after that day. That incident has haunted me for years, all of the what-ifs. But as I have gotten older, what haunts me most is the thought that others may not have been as lucky as we were.